The blood on Penelope Foster's dress had dried to a rust-brown stain that matched the dust of the Arizona Territory, and she knew if she stopped running now, she would never start again. She had been walking for 3 days since jumping off that stagecoach outside Needles, California. Her shoes worn through at the heels, her throat so parched she could barely swallow. The sun had set an hour ago, and the desert cold was settling into her bones when she saw the faint glow of lamplight in the distance. As she drew closer, she made out the shapes of buildings clustered along a dirt road, and above them, the dark silhouette of hills that looked like sleeping giants. A wooden sign creaked in the wind, and though she could barely read it in the darkness, she would later learn it said Oatman, Arizona Territory. Penelope stumbled into the first structure she found, a barn on the outskirts of the small mining town. The smell of hay and horses was overwhelming after days in the open desert, but it was the most welcoming scent she had encountered since fleeing Santa Fe. She climbed the ladder to the hayloft with the last of her strength, burrowed into the sweet-smelling hay, and fell into unconsciousness before she could even form a prayer of gratitude. She woke to the sound of a horse nickering below and sunlight streaming through the gaps in the barn walls. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest as she shifted in the hay, and her lips were so cracked they split when she tried to open her mouth. Through the floorboards of the loft, she could hear someone moving around below, the soft sound of a man's voice soothing the horses. She held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the hay, praying he would finish his business and leave. But her luck, which had been poor for months, failed her again. A ladder creaked, and she watched in frozen terror as a brown hat appeared, followed by a tanned face with startling blue eyes that widened when they spotted her. "Well," the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle despite his obvious surprise, "you are not a barn cat." Penelope tried to speak, but only a rasping sound emerged from her throat. The man's expression shifted from surprise to concern, and he climbed the rest of the way into the loft, moving slowly as if approaching a wounded animal. "Easy now," he said. "I am not going to hurt you. You look like you have been through hell already without me adding to it." He pulled a canteen from his belt and held it out to her. "Water. Drink slow." She snatched the canteen with trembling hands and had to force herself to follow his advice, taking small sips when every fiber of her being wanted to gulp it down. He watched her with those calm blue eyes, not speaking, just waiting. He was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 25 or 26, with sun-bleached brown hair and the lean build of someone who worked hard for his living. "Thank you," she finally managed to whisper, her voice still rough but functional. "I did not mean to trespass." "I will leave." She tried to stand, but her legs buckled immediately, and she would have fallen if he had not caught her arm. His grip was firm but careful, and he steadied her until she was sitting again. "You are not going anywhere in this condition," he said. "When did you last eat?" Penelope tried to remember. The farmer's wife who had given her a ride in their wagon had shared bread and cheese, but that had been 2 days ago, maybe 3. "I am not certain." The man shook his head and settled into the hay across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Name is Thomas Quinn. This is my barn, part of my ranch just outside town. And you are," she hesitated, wondering if she should lie, but something about his open face made deception feel wrong. "Penelope Foster." "Well, Miss Foster, would you like to tell me why you are sleeping in my hayloft looking like you have crossed half the territory on foot?" The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. She had been holding herself together through sheer will for so long that gentleness felt dangerous, like it might shatter whatever was left of her composure. "I had nowhere else to go." Thomas nodded as if this made perfect sense. "And the blood on your dress." Penelope looked down at the stain she had tried so hard not to think about. "It is not mine." "I figured as much. You hurt elsewhere, just tired and hungry. And I know I look terrible, but I promise I am not usually such a mess. I had circumstances." A ghost of a smile crossed Thomas's face. "Most people who end up in Oatman have circumstances. This is not exactly a destination town. It is where you end up when everywhere else has failed you." He stood and offered his hand. "Come on. Let us get you some proper food and water, then we can figure out what to do with you." "I do not have money to pay you," Penelope said quickly. "Not yet, but I can work. I am strong, or I will be again once I have eaten. I can clean, cook, tend animals. I am not looking for charity." Thomas's expression softened. "Did I ask for payment? Come on before you keel over. We can discuss terms of employment after you are not half dead." He helped her down the ladder with more patience than she deserved, and she had to lean on him more than she liked as they walked from the barn to a modest ranch house about 50 yards away. The property was neat but clearly belonged to a bachelor. The house was small, probably just 2 or 3 rooms, but well maintained. Around it, she could see a corral with several horses, a chicken coop, and what looked like a small vegetable garden that had seen better days. Inside, Thomas settled her into a chair at a wooden table and immediately set about preparing food. He moved around the small kitchen with easy efficiency, slicing bread, frying eggs, and brewing coffee that smelled like heaven. Penelope watched him, still half convinced this was a dream and she would wake up back in the desert. "How long have you been running?" Thomas asked as he set a plate in front of her. The directness of the question surprised her into honesty. 4 months, more or less. "I lost track somewhere in New Mexico. Running from the law." "No, from a man." Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Husband, he wanted to be." I declined. He did not accept my answer. "The blood." Penelope picked up a fork, her hand steadier now. "His associate." "He tried to stop me from leaving. There was a struggle. I hit him with a lamp. I did not stay to see if he was dead or just unconscious, and I have been moving ever since." She expected judgment, questions, maybe even suspicion. Instead, Thomas just nodded and poured her coffee. "Eat. Then sleep. The guest room is small but clean. We can talk more when you are rested. You are not concerned I might be a murderer sleeping under your roof." He looked at her directly, and she saw something hard beneath his gentle exterior. "Miss Foster, if a man got hurt trying to stop a woman from leaving when she wanted to go, then he got what he deserved. Besides, you have eyes like a startled deer. If you killed anyone, it was in self-defense, and that is not murder in my book." Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes for the first time since she had fled. She blinked them back and focused on eating, and the food tasted better than anything she could remember. True to his word, Thomas showed her to a small room with a narrow bed, clean sheets, and a window that looked out over the desert hills. "Sleep as long as you need," he said. "Door locks from the inside if it makes you feel safer." She wanted to thank him properly, to express the depth of her gratitude, but exhaustion was pulling her under like a tide. She managed a nod and he left, closing the door softly behind him. She locked it, more out of habit than fear of him, and collapsed onto the bed. She was asleep before her head fully settled on the pillow. When she woke, the light outside suggested late afternoon. She had slept for hours, maybe half a day, and her body felt more human than it had in weeks. Someone had left a basin of water, a cloth, and what looked like a clean dress outside her door. The dress was too big and clearly meant for a larger woman, but it was clean and free of bloodstains. She washed as best she could and changed, feeling incrementally more like herself. She found Thomas outside, working on fixing a section of fence. He looked up when she approached and wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Feel better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you for everything. The food, the bed, the dress. Dress belonged to my mother. She passed 2 years ago, but I kept some of her things. Figured they might be useful someday." He hammered another nail into the fence post. "You are welcome to stay until you figure out your next move. I was not lying about being able to use the help. The ranch is small, just me and hired help that comes twice a week, but there is always more work than time." Penelope watched him work, noting the careful precision of his movements. "Why are you being so kind to a stranger?" Thomas paused and looked at her thoughtfully. "My mother ended up in Oatman under similar circumstances to yours. Running from a bad situation. No money, no prospects. Someone helped her, gave her a chance to land on her feet. She never forgot that kindness, and she raised me to pay it forward when I could. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "you look like you could use a break from the universe kicking you around." "The universe has been wearing heavy boots lately," Penelope admitted. "Then let us give you some time to recover. No obligations, no expectations. Just honest work for honest pay, room and board included. When you are ready to move on, you move on. Until then, you have a place here." It was too good to be true, which made Penelope suspicious by instinct. But her instincts had failed her before, most notably with Richard Pemberton back in Santa Fe, the man whose marriage proposal she had rejected, and who had made it his mission to ensure she could never reject anyone again. She was tired of running, tired of being afraid, and Thomas Quinn's offer felt like a lifeline she could not afford to refuse. "I accept," she said, "and I promise I will earn my keep." "I believe you," Thomas said simply, and went back to work on the fence. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Penelope rose with the sun and helped Thomas with the endless tasks that came with running a ranch. She fed the chickens, gathered eggs, tended the struggling vegetable garden with a determination to make it thrive, and learned how to care for the horses. Thomas was a patient teacher, never condescending, always willing to show her how to do something as many times as it took for her to learn. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the hills, drinking coffee and talking about small things. Thomas told her about growing up in Oatman, about his father who had been a miner and his mother who had run a boarding house. She learned that he was 26, had inherited the ranch when his parents died within 6 months of each other from fever, and had been running it alone for 2 years. Penelope shared less about her own past, but what she did share came easier as time went on. She told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a bookkeeper who had died when she was 16. She had gone west with her aunt after her mother remarried a man who made it clear Penelope was not welcome in his house. Her aunt had died in Santa Fe, leaving Penelope to work as a seamstress until she caught the attention of Richard Pemberton, a wealthy merchant who decided she would make a suitable wife. "I said no," she explained one evening, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. "I said no clearly and repeatedly, but he was used to getting what he wanted. He started making it difficult for me to work, spreading rumors, ensuring no one would hire me. When I tried to leave town, he sent men after me. One of them got into my room at the boarding house. I defended myself." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. "You did what you had to do." "I do not know if I killed him. I do not know if they are still looking for me. I just know I could not stay." "Well, if they come here, they will have to go through me," Thomas said with quiet certainty. "And I am not as easy to intimidate as some." Penelope looked at him, this man who had taken her in without question, and felt something shift in her chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was the foundation of it. Trust, respect, gratitude, and beneath it all, a growing awareness of how his presence made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in a very long time. As summer deepened into fall, the ranch began to show the benefits of having two people working it. The garden flourished under Penelope's care, producing vegetables that they ate fresh and preserved for winter. The horses looked sleeker and healthier, and Thomas was able to take on more work breaking and training horses for other ranchers, which brought in additional income. They worked well together, developing an easy partnership that required few words. Penelope learned to anticipate what Thomas needed, and he seemed to instinctively know when she was struggling with a task and would step in to help without making her feel incompetent. The hired hands, two brothers named Jake and Samuel who came twice a week, accepted her presence without question, treating her with the same respectful distance they showed Thomas. But it was in the quiet moments that Penelope felt the change happening. When Thomas would smile at her across the dinner table, or when their hands would brush as they worked side by side, or when she would catch him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, she found herself noticing things about him she had not paid attention to before. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the strength in his hands, the gentleness in his voice when he talked to the horses. The way he always made sure she ate first, took the heavier loads, positioned himself between her and any potential danger. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Thomas cleared his throat in a way that suggested he had something important to say. "I have been thinking," he started, then paused. "The weather is going to turn soon. Winter in the high desert is not easy. The guest room, it is not well insulated. You will freeze in there when the temperature drops." "I will manage," Penelope said quickly. "I have survived worse." "I know you have, but you do not have to just survive here. That is not what I want for you." He turned to face her fully. "I have been working on something. Come with me." Curious, Penelope followed him away from the house, past the barn, to a spot she had noticed him spending time at over the past several weeks. She had assumed he was doing some kind of maintenance on ranch equipment, but as they approached, she saw something she had not expected. The frame of a small cabin stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. It was modest, maybe one large room with a loft, but the workmanship was solid and careful. Thomas had clearly been building it in every spare moment he could find. "I started this a few weeks after you arrived," Thomas said, his voice carrying a nervousness she had never heard before. "At first I told myself it was just a practical thing, an extra building, useful for storage or hired hands, but I am not a good liar, especially to myself. I built this for you, Penelope, a place that is yours where you do not have to be a guest or an employee. A home." Penelope stared at the cabin, her throat tight. "Thomas, I cannot accept this. It is too much." "It is not finished yet," he continued as if she had not spoken. "I need another few weeks to get the roof fully done, install the windows, build the fireplace. But it will be ready before the first snow." He took a breath and she heard the tremor in it. "And I am not asking you to just accept it. I am asking if you would consider sharing it with me." The world seemed to stop. Penelope turned to look at him, and in the fading light she could see the vulnerability in his face, the fear that she would reject him. "Share it," she repeated, needing to be certain she understood. "I love you," Thomas said simply. "I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you in that hayloft, looking terrified and defiant all at once. Every day since then, I have fallen harder. The way you attack every task like it is a personal challenge, the way you sing to the chickens when you think no one is listening, the way you never complain even when I know you are exhausted, the way you are brave enough to start over, to trust again after everything you have been through. I love you, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Penelope felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were not from fear or exhaustion or despair. I am still running, Thomas. I do not know if I will ever stop looking over my shoulder. Richard Pemberton is a powerful man with a long reach and a longer memory. Being with me could bring you trouble. Then we will face it together, Thomas said. I am not afraid of trouble, and I am not afraid of fighting for what matters to me. You matter to me, Penelope, more than anything. She thought about the past months, about how this man had given her safety, respect, and space to heal without asking for anything in return. She thought about how her heart had started beating differently when he was near, how she had started imagining a future instead of just surviving the present. She thought about trust, how hard it had been to give and how carefully he had earned it. I love you too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I have for weeks, but I was too afraid to admit it, afraid to hope for something good after so much bad. Thomas closed the distance between them in 2 strides and cupped her face in his calloused hands. Can I kiss you? The fact that he asked, that he still sought her consent even now, made her love him even more. Yes, she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then deeper as she wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. Is that a yes to the cabin? Penelope laughed, the sound surprising her with its pure joy. Yes to the cabin, yes to sharing it, yes to building a life together, yes to all of it. He kissed her again, and then they stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other, while the half-built cabin stood witness to their promises. The next weeks were a flurry of activity. Thomas worked on the cabin with renewed energy, and Penelope helped whenever she could, learning how to mix mortar and set stones for the fireplace. Jake and Samuel, upon learning what the cabin was for, volunteered extra hours to help with the construction, and it became a community project. Other ranchers from the area stopped by to contribute a window here, some lumber there, because that was how things worked in Oatman. You helped your neighbors and they helped you. The women from town, having heard that Thomas Quinn was building a cabin for a woman he intended to marry, showed up with gifts. Mrs. Henderson brought curtains she had made herself. The baker's wife contributed dishes and cooking pots. Even the saloon keeper's wife donated a beautiful quilt, claiming she had made too many and needed to clear space. Penelope was overwhelmed by the kindness, but also terrified. These people were accepting her, welcoming her into their community, and she had not told them the whole truth about her past. Every time someone new arrived with a gift and a smile, she felt the weight of her secrets pressing down on her. One afternoon, while Thomas was in town getting supplies, she was working in the garden when a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was well-dressed, out of place in the dusty ranch setting, and when he dismounted and approached her, every instinct screamed danger. "Miss Foster," he said, and her blood went cold. "I think you have the wrong person," she said, straightening and looking around for something she could use as a weapon if needed. The man smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I do not think so. I have been looking for you for quite some time. Mr. Pemberton has been very concerned about your well-being." "I am fine, as you can see. Tell Mr. Pemberton I appreciate his concern, but it is not necessary." "I am afraid I cannot do that. Mr. Pemberton has invested considerable time and resources in locating you. He feels you owe him a conversation at the very least." "I owe him nothing," Penelope said, her voice steady despite her fear. "I made my feelings clear before I left. If he cannot accept that, it is his problem, not mine." The man's expression hardened. "Mr. Pemberton does not see it that way. Neither do the authorities in Santa Fe, who would be very interested to know the whereabouts of a woman wanted for questioning in the severe injury of one of Mr. Pemberton's employees. That was self-defense. Who is to say? You fled before anyone could investigate properly." Very suspicious behavior. But Mr. Pemberton is a generous man. He is willing to overlook the incident if you return with me peacefully and give his proposal the consideration it deserves. Penelope felt sick. This was what she had been afraid of, what she had known in her bones would eventually happen. Men like Richard Pemberton did not let go of what they wanted, and they had the money and influence to bend the law to their purposes. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Then I will have no choice but to inform the territorial marshal of your location. I imagine he would be compelled to investigate, which would be very inconvenient for you and for the man I understand you have been living with. Mr. Quinn, is it? It would be unfortunate if his reputation suffered because he was harboring a fugitive." The threat to Thomas was more effective than any threat to herself. Penelope felt trapped, the walls closing in just as she had started to believe she might be free. "I need time to think," she said desperately. "You have until tomorrow morning. I am staying at the hotel in town. I will expect your answer by noon." He tipped his hat mockingly and mounted his horse. "Do the right thing, Miss Foster. Save yourself and your friend a great deal of trouble." He rode off, leaving Penelope shaking in the garden. She wanted to run again, to pack what little she owned and disappear into the desert. But she was so tired of running, and the thought of leaving Thomas felt like cutting out her own heart. She was still standing there, frozen with indecision, when Thomas returned from town. He took one look at her face and immediately crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "What happened?" She told him everything, the words spilling out in a rush. Thomas listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each sentence. "So he wants you to return to Santa Fe or he will turn you over to the marshal," Thomas summarized when she finished, "and implicate you as well. Thomas, I will not let that happen. I will leave tonight. You can tell them you had no idea about my past, that I deceived you." "Absolutely not," Thomas said firmly. "We are not running and you are not facing this alone. We are going to settle this properly." "How?" "He has money, influence, probably half the law enforcement in the territory in his pocket. We have nothing." "We have the truth," Thomas said, "and we have friends. Let me handle this." The next morning, when Pemberton's man returned to the ranch at the appointed time, he found not just Penelope and Thomas waiting, but also the territorial marshal, the mayor of Oatman, and several respected ranchers from the surrounding area. The marshal, a weathered man in his 50s named Garrett, stepped forward as the stranger dismounted. "You would be Pemberton's man." "I am Mr. Pemberton's associate, yes. I am here to escort Miss Foster back to Santa Fe to answer questions about a serious crime." "Funny thing about that," Marshal Garrett said. "I rode out to the ranch last night after Mr. Quinn brought some interesting information to my attention. Miss Foster here has been very forthcoming about the incident in Santa Fe. She also has a witness who saw the whole thing." Pemberton's man frowned. "That is impossible." "Not impossible at all," said a woman's voice. An older woman stepped forward from the group, someone Penelope had never seen before. "I was the owner of the boarding house where Miss Foster was staying. I saw Mr. Pemberton's man break into her room. I saw him try to force himself on her, and I saw her defend herself. I gave a full statement to the authorities in Santa Fe at the time, though I suspect it disappeared from the files somehow." "This woman is lying," Pemberton's man sputtered. "I still have the letter I sent to the territorial governor's office," the woman continued calmly, "along with statements from 2 other witnesses. When I heard through mutual acquaintances that Mr. Pemberton was hunting Miss Foster, I thought it important to ensure the truth was known. I have been traveling to make sure my testimony reached the right people." Marshal Garrett nodded. "I have reviewed Mrs. Patterson's evidence. It is compelling. more compelling than the accusation of a man known for using his wealth to manipulate legal proceedings. Miss Foster acted in self-defense, and there is no warrant for her arrest. Whatever business Mr. Pemberton thinks he has with her is purely personal, and she has made it clear she wants nothing to do with him. Mr. Pemberton will not be pleased, the man said, his composure cracking. Mr. Pemberton can take his displeasure and choke on it, Thomas said pleasantly. You can also tell him that if he sends anyone else to harass Miss Foster, or if he makes any attempt to interfere in her life again, I will personally ensure that everyone from here to Santa Fe knows exactly what kind of man he is. A man who cannot take no for an answer and uses violence and intimidation to get his way with women. I do not imagine that would be good for his business or his standing in the community. The mayor stepped forward. You should also know that Miss Foster is a valued member of our community now. We protect our own in Oatman. If Pemberton wants trouble, he will find more of it than he bargained for. Pemberton's man looked around at the wall of hostile faces and seemed to deflate. I will relay your message, he said stiffly, and mounted his horse. He rode off without another word. As soon as he was out of sight, Penelope's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the ground. Thomas was beside her immediately, pulling her into his arms. It is over, he murmured into her hair. You are safe, you are free. How? She managed to ask. How did you do all this? Thomas pulled back enough to look at her. After you told me about Pemberton's man yesterday, I rode into town and sent telegrams to every contact I could think of, asking if anyone knew anything about the incident in Santa Fe. Mrs. Patterson reached out within hours. She had been trying to find you to let you know you were cleared, but had lost your trail in New Mexico. As for the rest, he gestured to the assembled crowd, this is what community means. I told them you needed help and they came. Penelope looked around at the faces of the people who had defended her, most of whom she barely knew. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. All of you. I do not know how to repay this kindness. You already have, Mrs. Henderson said warmly. You brought life back to this ranch and to Thomas. That is payment enough. Now, when is this wedding we have been hearing about? Penelope felt her face flush as she looked at Thomas. We have not actually discussed that part yet. Thomas grinned and pulled something from his pocket. It was a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. This was my mother's. I know it is not fancy, but it would mean the world to me if you would wear it. Marry me, Penelope, make this official. She did not hesitate. Yes, absolutely yes. The small crowd erupted in cheers and congratulations, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Penelope felt entirely, completely safe. The cabin was finished by the first week of November, and they were married in front of it on a crisp Saturday afternoon. The ceremony was simple, performed by the circuit preacher who passed through Oatman once a month, but it was perfect. Penelope wore a dress that the women of the town had sewn together from contributed fabric, each piece representing a different family's blessing. Thomas wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving her face. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Thomas kissed her, Penelope felt something she had thought lost forever, hope for the future. The celebration that followed was a community affair, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. But eventually, the guests departed, and Thomas and Penelope were left alone in their new cabin, finally and truly home. Thomas lit the fireplace, and the warm glow filled the single large room that made up the main floor. The cabin was furnished simply but comfortably. A bed in one corner, a table and chairs near the fireplace, a kitchen area with a stove that Thomas had installed himself. The loft above would eventually be a second bedroom, but for now it was storage space. It is not much, Thomas said, suddenly nervous. I know you probably grew up in finer places. Penelope turned to him and took his hands. It is perfect. It is the first place that has truly felt like home since I was a child. Because it is ours, built with love and hope and everything good I thought I had lost. I would not trade it for a mansion. Thomas pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I am going to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me, he promised. I could never regret it, Penelope whispered. You saved me, Thomas. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, he corrected gently. You gave me purpose again, reminded me what I was working for. Before you, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You changed everything. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the firelight, and then Thomas pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. I want you to be happy here, Penelope. Tell me how to make you happy. She smiled and reached up to touch his face. You already do, every single day. Just by being exactly who you are. He kissed her then, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as she pressed against him. When they finally made it to the bed, it was with the tenderness of two people who had found something rare and precious in each other and were determined to cherish it. Later, as they lay tangled together under the quilt that the saloon keeper's wife had made, Penelope traced patterns on Thomas's chest and marveled at how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been running scared, alone and desperate. Now she was married to a good man in a home built just for her, surrounded by a community that had accepted her without question. What are you thinking? Thomas asked sleepily, his fingers running through her hair. I am thinking about the hayloft, she admitted. About how if I had walked a little further into town that night instead of stopping at the first building I saw, my whole life would be different. I might have missed you entirely. Thomas tightened his arms around her. I do not believe that. I think we were always going to find each other somehow. Maybe not in my barn, maybe not that exact night, but eventually. Some things are just meant to be. You believe in fate. I believe in you and me, he said simply. That is enough. Their first winter together was hard but not unbearable. The cabin proved well built and cozy, the fireplace keeping them warm even on the coldest nights. They worked together to keep the animals fed and safe, to maintain the ranch through snow and ice. And in the quiet evening hours, they would sit by the fire and plan for the future. Thomas wanted to expand the ranch, to build up the horse breeding operation. Penelope wanted to start selling preserves and baked goods in town, maybe even establish a regular business. They talked about children, about how many they wanted and what kind of life they would build for them. I want them to grow up knowing they are loved and safe, Penelope said one night. I want them to never doubt that they belong, that they are wanted. They will, Thomas promised. We will make sure of it. Spring brought new life to the ranch and new opportunities. Thomas's reputation as a horse trainer had grown, and ranchers from as far as Kingman were bringing him animals to work with. Penelope started selling her preserves and found she had a talent for business, negotiating fair prices and building relationships with shop owners. They fell into new rhythms, their partnership deepening with each passing month. They learned each other's moods and needs, when to push and when to give space, how to fight fair on the rare occasions they disagreed, and how to always come back together at the end of the day. In early summer, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then set her down gently as if she had suddenly become made of glass. We are going to be parents, he said wonderingly. We are, she confirmed, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Are you ready for this? I have been ready since the day I met you, he said. Everything good in my life started with you, Penelope. This is just one more miracle. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though the summer heat made her uncomfortable, and she had to curtail some of her heavier work around the ranch. Thomas became absurdly protective, insisting she rest more, eat more, do less. She found it both annoying and endearing. The women of Oatman rallied around her again, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and the wisdom that came from their own experiences. Mrs. Henderson became a particular friend, stopping by regularly to check on Penelope and share stories about her own 5 children. As fall arrived and the baby's arrival drew closer, Thomas became increasingly anxious. He prepared obsessively, making sure they had everything they might need, that the doctor knew to be on call, that there was always firewood stacked and food prepared in case the baby came suddenly. On a cold night in February 1884, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, with the doctor and Mrs. Henderson both in attendance, while Thomas paced outside the cabin wearing a path in the dirt. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst through the door to find Penelope exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle. "A boy," she said softly. "We have a son." Thomas approached slowly, as if afraid to break the spell, and looked down at his child for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists, his face scrunched in indignation at being born. "He is perfect," Thomas breathed. "You are perfect. I love you both so much." They named him William after Thomas's father, and he became the center of their world. Thomas was a devoted father, taking to the role with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. He would spend hours holding William, talking to him about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together when he was older. Penelope watched her husband become a father and fell in love with him all over again. She saw the gentleness in how he changed diapers, the patience in how he walked the floor during fussy nights, the pure adoration in his face every time he looked at their son. The ranch continued to thrive. With the money from Thomas's horse training and Penelope's preserve business, they were able to hire permanent help, which freed up more time for their family. They expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms so William could have his own space as he grew. As William learned to walk and then to talk, he became his father's shadow, following Thomas everywhere and trying to imitate everything he did. Thomas taught him about horses and ranching, how to be kind to animals and respectful of the land. Penelope taught him letters and numbers, read to him every night, and made sure he understood the value of education. When William was 3, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time, it was a daughter they named Rose after Penelope's mother. She had Thomas's blue eyes and Penelope's dark hair, and she was the most placid baby either of them had ever seen. William was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her, to hold her and show her his toys. Thomas and Penelope watched their children grow and felt blessed beyond measure. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and milestones. William's first day of school, Rose learning to walk, family dinners around the table in their now significantly expanded cabin, Christmases with the whole community, summers spent swimming in the creek that ran through their property. They faced challenges, of course. A drought one year that nearly destroyed them financially, only for the community to rally once again with support and resources. A bad fall that left Thomas with a broken leg, forcing Penelope to run the ranch for 3 months while he healed. The normal struggles of raising children, of building a business, of maintaining a marriage through the daily grind of life. But through it all, they had each other. Every night, no matter how hard the day had been, they would find their way back to each other, remembering the promise they had made in front of that half-built cabin. One evening, when William was 10 and Rose was 7, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. The children were playing a game with pebbles while Thomas and Penelope sat close together, his arm around her shoulders. "You ever think about that night?" Thomas asked quietly. "When I found you in the hayloft," Penelope smiled. "All the time. I think about how scared I was, how certain I was that my life was over. And then you appeared and changed everything. You were so fierce, even terrified and half-starved. I knew right then you were someone special." "I was a mess," Penelope corrected with a laugh. "You were a survivor. And you became my wife, the mother of my children, my best friend and partner in everything. That woman in the hayloft became my whole world." Penelope leaned into him, watching their children play. "I used to think happiness was not something I was allowed to have. That I had made too many mistakes, run too far, lost too much. But you taught me that happiness is not something you earn or deserve. It is something you build day by day with someone who loves you." "And I built you a cabin," Thomas said with a grin. "You built me a home," she corrected. "There is a difference." William looked up from his game. "Tell us the story again, Pa, about how you found Ma in the barn." It was a story they had told many times, carefully edited for young ears, but the children never tired of hearing it. Thomas launched into the familiar tale, and Penelope watched her family, feeling contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. As the years continued to pass, the ranch grew into one of the most successful in the region. William showed an aptitude for horse training that exceeded even his father's, and by the time he was 16, he was working alongside Thomas as a full partner. Rose discovered a talent for breeding and began developing a line of hardy desert horses that became sought after throughout the territory. Arizona became a state in 1912, and the Quinns celebrated with the rest of Oatman, though the town itself was beginning to change. Mining was playing out, and people were moving on to new opportunities. But the Quinn Ranch remained a constant, a testament to hard work and love. Penelope and Thomas grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening on their faces. They became grandparents when William married a school teacher named Sarah and had 3 children of his own. Rose eventually married a veterinarian who settled in Oatman specifically to be near the Quinn Ranch, and they had 2 daughters. Through all the changes, through prosperity and hardship, through the joys of watching their family grow and the sorrows of losing friends to age and illness, Thomas and Penelope remained devoted to each other. They still sat on the porch every evening they could, still held hands, still looked at each other with the same love that had bloomed in front of a half-built cabin decades earlier. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Penelope back to the original cabin, which they had kept maintained even after building a larger house to accommodate their growing family. It was used now as a guest house, a quiet retreat, but it still held all the memories of their early days together. "You remember the first night we spent here?" Thomas asked as they stood in the main room, which looked much as it had all those years ago. "Every detail," Penelope said. "I remember thinking I could not believe this was real, that I had found someone who loved me exactly as I was, broken pieces and all." "You were never broken," Thomas said firmly. "Wounded, maybe, hurt by people who did not deserve you, but never broken. You were always strong, always whole. I just gave you a safe place to remember that." Penelope turned to him, this man who had been her savior, her husband, her partner, her best friend for 3 decades. "You gave me everything, Thomas. A home, a family, a life I never dreamed possible. You took a terrified woman hiding in a hayloft and showed her what love really means. And you took a lonely rancher going through the motions and reminded him what he was living for," Thomas countered. "We saved each other, Penelope. That was always the truth of us." They held each other in the cabin where their life together had truly begun, and Penelope thought about the strange and winding path that had led her here. All the pain and fear and running, all of it had been worth it to find this man, this life, this love. As they grew older still, into their 60s and then 70s, they slowed down but never stopped. Thomas still worked with the horses, though he left the harder work to William and the hired hands. Penelope still made her preserves, now with Rose and her daughters helping. They sat on the porch and watched their grandchildren play, telling them stories about the old days, about Arizona before it was a state, about building something from nothing. William had taken over running the ranch years earlier, doing so with the same care and integrity his father had shown. Rose's horse breeding program had made the Quinn name known throughout the Southwest. Their grandchildren were growing into fine young people, carrying forward the values that Thomas and Penelope had worked so hard to instill. One evening, when Thomas was 78 and Penelope 76, they sat on the porch as they had thousands of times before. Thomas's health had been declining, his heart not as strong as it once was, but he refused to spend his remaining days in bed. "It has been a good life," he said quietly, holding Penelope's hand. "The best life," she agreed. "I would not change a single moment, not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts. They brought me to you. They taught me what I was capable of surviving, which made me appreciate the beautiful things even more." Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "I need you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Every single day with you was a gift." Penelope heard the farewell in his words and felt tears prick her eyes. "Thomas, I am not afraid," he said softly. "I have lived a full life, loved deeply and been loved in return. I have children and grandchildren who will carry on our legacy. I have no regrets, Penelope, only gratitude." "I cannot imagine life without you," she whispered. "You will not be without me. I will be in every sunset we watched together, every corner of this ranch we built, every story our grandchildren tell about the old days. I will be in the cabin I built for you, in the love we created. I will always be with you." He passed peacefully 2 days later, sitting in his favorite chair with Penelope holding his hand and their family surrounding them. His last words were, "I love you," and Penelope whispered them back, knowing he heard her. The grief was immense, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. But Penelope was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love and support, and the community of Oatman, which had welcomed her so many years ago, rallied once again. She continued living on the ranch, refusing all suggestions that she move in with William or Rose. This was her home, built by the man she loved, and she would not leave it. She spent her days tending her garden, making her preserves, and telling stories to her grandchildren about their grandfather. On quiet evenings, she would walk to the original cabin and sit inside, remembering. The day he proposed, the way he looked at her on their wedding day, the birth of their children, 30 years of evenings spent on the porch, the 1,000 small moments that made up a life together. 3 years after Thomas passed, Penelope went to sleep one night in the cabin where it had all begun and did not wake up. She was 79 years old and had lived a full, rich life. She died peacefully, with a slight smile on her face, and those who found her said it looked like she was dreaming of something beautiful. William and Rose buried her next to Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree they had planted together decades earlier. The whole community turned out for the funeral, testament to the impact she had made on so many lives. The ranch continued under William's care, eventually passing to his children and then to their children. The original cabin was maintained as a family memorial, a reminder of where it all started. The story of the woman who hid in the hayloft and the cowboy who built her a cabin became family legend, passed down through generations. And in Oatman, Arizona, where mining towns often turned to ghost towns, the Quinn Ranch remained a living legacy of love, hard work, and the power of finding home in the most unexpected places. The family would gather every year on the anniversary of Thomas and Penelope's wedding, bringing their children to the original cabin and telling the story again. About fear transformed into courage, desperation into hope, and two people who found each other in the darkness and built a light that lasted generations. Because some love stories are not just about the two people who fall in love. They are about the families they create, the communities they build, the legacy they leave behind. Thomas and Penelope's love story was written in every board of that cabin, every fence post on that ranch, every child and grandchild who carried their values forward into the world. It was a story about a woman running from violence who found safety, about a man working alone who found partnership, about two people who should have been broken by their circumstances, but instead chose to build something beautiful together. And it started with a terrified woman hiding in a hayloft and a kind cowboy who decided to build her a cabin and asked her to share it. Everything else, all the love and family and life that followed, grew from that single act of compassion and the choice to turn it into something lasting. Their grandchildren's grandchildren still live on that land, still maintain that cabin, still tell that story. Because some things are worth preserving, worth remembering, worth passing down through the ages. Love is one of them. Home is another. And the story of how Thomas Quinn and Penelope Foster found both in each other is one that will never be forgotten. The cabin stands still, weathered but strong, a monument to a love that began in a hayloft and blossomed into something eternal. And on quiet evenings, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the sound of two people laughing on the porch, making plans for the future, building a life one day at a time. That is the legacy they left behind. Not just land or buildings or even family, though those are important. But the knowledge that it is possible to start over, to find love after fear, to build something lasting from the ashes of what came before. Thomas and Penelope proved that home is not where you start, but what you build with the people who choose to love you. And their story, which began with a woman sleeping in a hayloft and a cowboy who built her a cabin, became a testament to the transformative power of love, the importance of community, and the incredible things that can happen when you choose kindness over fear, hope over despair, and building together over facing the world alone.